Want to know why I haven't published many videos this week? Well, watch this weekly update for week 16. Welcome to Mobile Application Tutorials. My name's Nigel and this is the weekly update for week 16, just to give everyone insight of what I've been up to and why or why not I might have released mini videos or little videos this week. Okay, one delay that I've had is I've had a bout of influenza over the last couple of weeks, and I had it for about 10 days and it was in my chest, so I had a bit of bronchitis. I thought I'd knocked it back after 10 days, started exercising again, and then it came back. So early this week, in the weekend and early this week, I was feeling a bit poorly, and that knocked me back at least 2 good days and pushed everything back by at least 2 days. So, and that's one of the reasons for why there's been a bit of a delay in the video shipment production. Okay, so what have I been working on this week? I ended up getting involved in my .gitignore file in my Android Studio. For those of you who don't know what a .gitignore file is, it's a way of you filtering out unnecessary files in your Android project. And you might think, well, what are unnecessary files? You do get a lot of files that are sort of built dynamically when you build and run your project on your device. There's a lot of temporary files there that get created and deleted. You don't need to put them into Git because they're changing all the time, and you don't want to keep track of any temporary files or files that you're not going to touch. And so you can filter out these files in the .gitignore. And I spent a bit of time working on my .gitignore just to try and filter out, just to try and remove all the unnecessary stuff that no one would ever care about or need to see. Unfortunately, by doing that, I removed some necessary files for when you want to build a project or get a project from GitHub. And I realized, oh, I've filtered out these files as well. And people will need these if they actually want to build a project from GitHub. In other words, running Android Studio, you just enter in the Git address, and then you can import the project directly from there and run that. And that, up till now, that hasn't actually been working because I'd removed in my gitignore file some irrelevant files there. So previously you'd need to download the files from GitHub and then import those files as an Android project, and that would set up all your Cradle and everything else and it'll run fine from there. Now that step's unnecessary. You can just build the project directly from GitHub. At the moment, I've just set this up and working on the Android Video 2 camera application. Once I get around to it, and I'll announce it on these weekly updates, I'll go through the other projects and make the relevant .gitignore file changes. So a lot of people ask me to send them zip code of what I've been working on, the source code in a zip file. That will never ever happen. It's just completely bad practice, and in any serious software developers, you're not going to share files with zip files, period, as such. But I probably will make a tutorial to show you how easy it is to install an Android project, a project in Android Studio with the address to GitHub address for doing that. So there was a little bit of time just tweaking that out and working nutting out the problems of that. I sort of picked up this problem because I was moving across to Android Studio 2.0 version, and I came across the .gitignore problem there. Anyway, talking about Android Studio version 2.0, I started using that in earnest on the debugging series that I've started working on, and I started using Android Studio for that. A few initial observations are you will be heavily encouraged to upgrade to your Android project to the version of Gradle that's supplied with Android Studio 2.0, and I think that's 2.10, so you'll be encouraged to move across to that because you'll get all the new features that Android Studio 2.0 provides with that. So I did upgrade my Android projects up to 2.10 Gradle version. It also prompted me to update my HAXM environment, and that's for the emulator. Up to date, I haven't used the emulator. I just do all my development on hardware, but you do get prompted to update your emulator as well. And other initial observations was I seem to spend a lot of time in the build.gradle mode, almost painfully slow. It would tell me, okay, your gradle.build file's taken 2.5 minutes to be built. Nice announcement. And then I'd do my next build, and it'd take another 2.5 minutes, then the next build, and it started getting very frustrating. This was while I was working on the debugging tutorial series. And then after installing the application on my device, the Nexus 5X, I was getting attempt to update the application, and Android Studio would no longer be able to see my activity file. And there might be issues in my build configuration, but it's not stuff that I'm seeing on the older version of Android Studio. And once I had this problem where it could no longer see my activity file, I'd have to do a clean on my environment, rebuild my Android project, and it'd be fine, it'd work, and then it would, again, after an amount of time, it'd be no longer able to see my activity file. So by then I got too frustrated, and for the final part of the Android debugging tutorial series, I reverted back to Android Studio 1.5, and all those issues I was seeing in Android Studio 2.0 just went away. So I will definitely, of course, I'm going to have to move across to Android Studio 2.0, and I think if I'm starting any projects from scratch, I will do that in Android Studio 2.0, but I think there possibly could be issues if you're migrating your older Android Studio projects up to 2.0, possibly you may see issues, and that's a suspicion that I think may be what I'm seeing here. So for this moment in time, I'm going to recontinue my Android Studio development on version 1.5. I also posted a WordPress post on how to apply and create patches. That was a tutorial that I'd done on the previous week. So that article's now been posted, and I made the announcements on that on all my social media accounts. And while I was working on the Android debugging tutorials series, at the large stage where I was implementing a fix for that, I did unearth a few more bugs on the Android Studio, on the Android Camera 2 video application. So I'll briefly just describe those. One of those bugs is when you first install and run the application for the very first time, just once, it creates a temporary empty video file. There was just a bit of old code left over that should have been removed and hadn't been removed. So one of the bug fixes is just removing that code that creates an empty video file just the once on installation. Another fix was for the media recorder object that wasn't being cleaned up when the application gets closed. So I fixed that up so that object and those resources get cleaned up when the application gets closed. That's also quite important. Didn't actually affect the running of the application as such on my Android Nexus device, but I also had to push across where we create that media object. It gets created once the camera device is connected, not an on create. And so that fixed a issue I was seeing in the Samsung Note 4, but I wasn't seeing in the Android Nexus 5. And there was one other issue with one of the last tutorials for the Android Camera 2 video app. When we created the chronometer, this is the time of showing us how long we're recording for. When you first install the application, again, it does a restart on connected mode. And in the on connected mode code, the code runs in a thread, in a background thread, not on the UI thread. And I was doing calls to the chronograph view, and because it's a view, it can only be called on the UI thread. The calls to the chronograph member were happening on a different thread. So I fixed that up. I just put a run on UI thread method call just to ensure the code in that particular portion there ensure that gets run on the UI thread. So those 3 fixes I put together and uploaded to the GitHub for the camera to video app. So they're all uploaded now, and that you do need to have those code fixes in place to do the last part of the debugging video tutorial series, which is actually putting together the fix into place. And I also published the introduction to the Android debugging tutorial series, and at the time of recording this, around this time, I expect to publish part 2 of that tutorial series, which will be identifying the cause of your Android bug. So keep an eye out to watch out for that one. That should be released probably just before this video is released, and I expect to release the last video episode of that debugging tutorial series early next week, which will be providing a fix for the bug. So, and that will conclude that 3-episode tutorial series on Android development debugging. And after that, I'll be back onto the Android video to camera application. I'm now working on the development part of doing the camera capture part, because this video camera, you can also take still pictures from preview. You'll also be able to take still pictures from the record session as well. So you'll be in 2 modes of when you want to actually capture a still image. So I'm just working on the preview part of capturing a still image, just working like a normal camera should. And once that's been completed, most of that code should be able to be reused for capturing still images while you're in the record mode. So currently working on just implementing the code for that, testing it, debugging it prior to putting together the articles prior to developing the actual video for it. And that might sound a lot, and I think at some stage I will have to do a behind the scenes of actually how I put together these videos and just list the steps and processes and what's actually required just to put a video together. You might be surprised by the amount of time and hours that it does require for each video being uploaded. Anyway, that concludes the update for week 16. If you want to keep up to date with my other updates or any of the other tutorials that I'm working on, click on that subscribe button down below. And if you do want to keep up to date with all the latest things that I'm up to, the social media is quite a useful way to do this. So if you're on a PC, there's my social media accounts that you can click on to just to keep updated with my news. So things like bug fixes, announcements, video publish, everything like that happens on the social media account. So it's an effective way just to track of when I'm doing something or releasing something. And don't forget, just above me is a link to my website as well. And that's where I can put everything together in a web article. It can have the video, it can have the details of GitHub and descriptions of the code changes as well for the normal tutorials. Anyway, that's it for this one. Everyone have a good weekend, and I'll be chatting to you probably the same time next week. Bye for now.